This is a great topic tonight. What is the purpose of the ego? We just like the so much of what I say in meditation and even just like in passing in life is just like poo-pooing the ego. Like it's so dumb. The ego is terrible and we're just always trying to get rid of it. But there is a very real purpose for it. The reason that I spend most of my time talking about how we're meant to, dissolve the ego or stop being attached to it or associated with it is because most of us are just pure ego. Like we are, this is not to say that I think I'm amazing. It's like, or I think I'm terrible, or I'm just focusing on the separation between me and the rest of humanity and the rest of the universe. And most of us don't have a problem of being overly connected to the universe. So that's why I do it. But I'm going to pretend tonight that you guys have the problem of being overly connected to the universe. You are so free of the ego that you want a convincing argument for why the ego is important. Now, I am not telling you that you should try to strengthen your ties with your ego necessarily. I'm saying that the whole point of this is going to basically boil down to it's okay that you have an ego, stop freaking out about it, and don't be so resistant to it. When you do that, then you'll more easily be able to let it go in meditation or with whatever you're doing. But that's what we'll get to at the end. So I got two quotes. If you guys haven't signed up yet for our newsletter, you're automatically signed up for. But there's another really good newsletter by James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. And this is one of my favorite things. He just has some quotes from himself and quotes from other people. So the two quotes I thought this week worked really well with this talk. This is by Richard Bach. He said, argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours. So this is what our ego does. Our ego is always looking for reasons that we stay the way that we are, reasons that we stay small, reasons that we can't try this, we can't try that. And I think it's kind of clear why that's a less than ideal thing, because we don't want to stay small. We want to be able to branch out and do other things. But let's talk about why it's a good thing to stay small and to have our limitations. It's so that we don't just think, I'm going to fly today and just jump out the window or just walk into traffic and be like, I'm made of steel. I've been practicing martial arts for weeks. Nobody can run me over. Like, there are reasons to recognize our limitations. And the really important ones are the physical limitations. And then most of it has a tendency in our world to boil down to, or to come back to, social limitations or psychological limitations and things that we put on ourselves that really aren't there. Nonetheless, they are really of our design, right? Our limitations are really by the ego, for the ego, and it's important that we know that. The second quote is by Hermann Hesse, and he says, learn what is to be taken seriously and laugh at the rest. Similar to samurai maxim, which I butcher every single time, which is basically treat matters. It's basically treat small things as if they are very important, and treat big things as if they're not important at all, or treat big things lightly. And this is great because we have a tendency when we are connected to the ego mind, or acting or thinking from the ego, to think that everything is very serious. Everything is the end of the world, and I can't believe that I'm having to deal with this right now, and all of the stress, anxiety, and like limitingness that comes from that when we think everything is so serious. So I think it's a very helpful drill practice to look at yourself in the mirror every day. If you haven't done this before, do this every day for a while and just laugh at yourself. Because if you can't laugh at yourself, then you're taking yourself too seriously, and you are the thing that should be taken the least seriously. All the thoughts that are going on in here, all the stuff that your ego is trying to tell you to do, all of that is of the most ridiculous order. That is all stuff to laugh at. And there are things that we need to take seriously, and there are things that we need to be able to recognize. Like this is a real thing. This is something that maybe, I can recognize. This is really my ego trying to insert, um, anxiety or things that are really not necessary. But there's a purpose for that. If the reason that we have kind of evolved to have this sense of things that are like socially, there's a possibility of being ostracized from our group, is because people who in the past didn't have any fear of being ostracized just acted like idiots, got ostracized, and then they just died in the woods by themselves. And then people who developed the sense of like, I know what other people are going to think if I do this. And so I'm going to take this very seriously, make sure I don't mess it up so they don't kick me out of the village and I don't get eaten by a tiger tonight. So it serves a purpose. And I have many people in my life who have a much more healthy amount of anxiety than I do. And there is a purpose for this. I like to remind them and to remind myself that this is an evolutionary advantage up to a point. If you have no anxiety whatsoever and you're just going through life like nothing matters and nothing is to be taken seriously at all, then you're going to have problems. People are going to think that you're terrible, or you're just going to, mess it up and be kicked out of society. So the most extreme example of this is you're committing some terrible crime and they put you in jail or they kill you. You don't want to do that. So have something that you recognize, at least the most serious things. And then there is a lot more that you should just be laughing at. That's all that's on my little piece of paper here. I had this thought last night as I was struggling to sleep, as I do these days with a small child who's always yelling, is this thought was like the ego, it serves a purpose. One of the main purposes of the ego is it's like our driver. So we're going through the world in this car that is like our body, and some of us have like Ferraris, some of us have like VW, we have Pintos. I have like a old BMW. It's reliable, like solid German engineering, but it makes some noises and is falling apart in certain places. But you got whatever you got, and then you have a driver, right? The driver is the person that's kind of taking you through and like, taking you to where you're supposed to be next and kind of taking care of the logistics of life. And then our driver kind of thinks that they're becoming a tour guide and they're like, really, you need to do this or that. And they're just starting to talk the whole time. You know how when you sit in an Uber sometimes, this is why I think that Waymo is going to be very popular, because you get into that Uber or that Lyft and you have a very talkative driver who does not get that, like, I'm reading emails for a reason right now. And they just keep wanting to talk to you. And that can be fun in some cases, but in a lot of cases, it's like, I just want some silence. Well, your driver, that is your ego, is just constantly bombarding you with all kinds of nonsense. And some of it's interesting and some of it's important. And most of it's just silly stuff to be laughed at. Nonetheless, it serves a purpose. The driver is taking us around, getting us from place to place. Gotta have a driver. If you don't have, because we don't have, our bodies are not self-driving cars. They have something that's kind of guiding us there. And then there's the good and the bad that comes with that. So when you start to hear that voice, and let's say that it's in meditation or it's in something else where you're trying not to have so much ego involved, maybe you're sparring or grappling with somebody, you're practicing Tai Chi, you hear that voice come up and it's trying to tell you this or that. It's trying to tell you, you should really do this. You should feel dumb because of this mistake that you made or all that stuff. Just remember, this is your driver that is really used to being in charge. Your ego really thinks that they know what's best. Your ego thinks that it knows everything, in fact. Or your ego thinks that it knows nothing at all and it's just really stressed about that. In any case, your ego is all in some kind of way about what it knows and what it doesn't know. And if you recognize, well, that's what this thing does. That's my driver. That's the thing that's constantly trying to get me places and talk to me too much. And if you fight against that and you're like, I'm not supposed to have a driver, well, then you're just going to sit there in your car and not go anywhere. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. That's what meditation is for. That's the time that you sit there and try not to have a driver, try not to have all that noise, try not to be moving places physically or mentally or emotionally, and you're just sitting, right? And you're eventually going to die if you literally just sit here. You don't get up and get food or, go to work or whatever. So the ego is there to take you places and give you a little bit of extra flavor. I think that again, it's a very important thing to recognize the utility, the usefulness, and then thank your driver for taking you around. Say thank you so much. You have been very useful. And then sometimes you got to say, you know what? I feel like driving right now. My higher self is going to get behind the driver's seat and either make sure that we sit still while we're meditating or make sure that we're letting go of whatever there is to be let go of throughout the rest of your life. It is our practice to spend more and more time where we let our driver sit in the back seat. You want to kick your driver out of the car and just speed away, but you got to take your driver with you. And just like they'll still try to talk to you and you'd be like, that's nice, but I'm driving right now. I'm in charge. I choose the music that's on, or I choose that there's no music on right now at all. And then I'm in charge. So this big part of our practice is just putting your driver in the back seat, ignoring them for a time, and just, steering the car where you decide to steer it. And sometimes it is just sitting still. Wonderful. This is, if you have not read this book yet, you should. The book, it's called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And this is one of the better books on this subject. That's why it's called The Book. So this is Alan Watts, and you should read Alan Watts, but you should also watch and or listen to his talks on YouTube. He is very pre-YouTube, but a lot of them are up there. So he's talking about the human condition, basically. It's like this feeling of being lonely and very temporary visitors in the universe, which is kind of how we have a tendency to feel, is in flat contradiction to everything known about man and all other living organisms in the sciences. We do not come into this world. We come out of it as leaves from a tree. As the ocean waves, the universe peoples. Every individual is an expression of the whole realm of nature, a unique action of the total universe. This fact is rarely, if ever, experienced by most individuals. Even those who know it to be true in theory do not sense or feel it, but continue to be aware of themselves as isolated egos inside bags of skin. I like this description of a human being. You're an isolated ego in a bag of skin. And really, this very thin layer. I like using the analogy of a hot dog because it's even more clear that this little casing that the hot dog is in. Like if you just drop a package of hot dogs on the ground and step on it lightly, it all just mushes together. And this is what we are. If some giant came over and stepped on us, we would all be experiencing the oneness. We're all just the same stuff. And even our mind, right? Of course, we have some differences, but we are vastly more similar than we are different. But it is the function of our ego that loves to keep us in our little separate meat sack and be like, I'm nothing like this hot dog over there. I'm totally distinct. I look in the mirror every day and I think, yes, this is my beautiful meat sack, and nobody else is like this. Or I look at myself in the mirror and I think, look at this terrible meat sack. It's awful. How come I can't have that other person's meat sack, which is totally different? Not recognizing that person also wakes up with some back pain or whatever it is. So this next part kind of plays a little bit more on this meat sack idea. There was never a time when the world began because it goes round and round like a circle, and there is no place on a circle where it begins. Look at my watch. which tells the time. It goes around, and so the world repeats itself again and again. But just as the hour hand of the watch goes up to 12 and down to 6, so too is there day and night, waking and sleeping, living and dying, summer and winter. It's all like yin and yang. You can't have any one of these without the other, because you wouldn't be able to know what black is unless you had seen it side by side with white, or white unless side by side with black. In the same way, there are times when the world is and times when it isn't. For if the world went on and on without rest forever and ever, it would get horribly tired of itself. It comes and it goes. Now you see it, now you don't. So because it doesn't get tired of itself, it always comes back again after it disappears. It's like your breath. It goes in and it goes out. And if you try to hold it in all the time, you feel terrible. If you haven't tried that yet, you can try it after meditation tonight. It's also like the game of hide and seek, because it's always fun to find new ways of hiding and to seek for someone who doesn't always play hide in the same place. So God also likes to play hide and seek. And you can think God, however you believe that is, or just the universe in general. And this is the way that Alan Watts means it. But because there is nothing outside of God, he has no one but himself to play with. How sad. But he gets over this difficulty by pretending that he is not himself. This is his way of hiding from himself. He pretends that he is you and I and all the people in the world, all the animals, all the plants, all the rocks, all the stars. In this way, he has strange and wonderful adventures, some of which are terrible and frightening. But these are just like bad dreams. But when he wakes up, they will disappear. Now, when God plays hide and pretends that he is you and I, he does it so well that it takes him a long time to remember where and how he hid himself. But that's the whole fun of it, just what he wanted to do. He doesn't want to find himself too quickly, for that would spoil the game. That is why it is so difficult for you and me to find out that we are God in disguise, pretending not to be himself. But when the game has gone on long enough, all of us will wake up, stop pretending, and remember that we are all one single self, the God who is all that there is and who lives forever and ever. Of course, you must remember that God isn't shaped like a person. People have skins, and there is always something outside of our skins. If there weren't, we wouldn't know the difference between what is inside and outside our bodies. It goes on and on. There's another part here that I can't find, but he describes all the living beings on Earth as being like little tubes, and we just take stuff in one end and then send it out the other end, and that's like all that we do all day long. And maybe it's the food that we're eating, or maybe it's the information that we're taking in, all that stuff. But I think that's a really fun way to think of our ego, is we are convincing ourselves, basically from birth or like soon after, that we are distinct, we're separate, and we have this thing that really is just as fragile as like the skin on a hot dog that's separating us from each other. In class, in physical practice, so much of our experience is of that. Like literally sometimes it actually physically dissolves because we hit each other too hard, or we're like grappling, and it's like, oh, I can't tell where I start and my partner ends. And that's great. We should have that experience. When you are really practicing with somebody, you are, again, no longer thinking victory and defeat. And in that experience of being truly partners with somebody, you're able to kind of meld. And it's like you have your energy, you have your partner's energy, and then you have the energy that you make together. And it can't always just stay like separate energy. So that is, one of the ways that we experience this. And it wouldn't be as interesting to do that with a partner if there was no separation that we ever experienced. Just like it wouldn't be a fun game for God to play hide and seek if it was just over like that. The first time you hear something about the oneness, you're like, that's it. I'm enlightened. I understand all. I have fully experienced the, my higher self, and my ego is no longer here. That would be way too easy, totally uninteresting. So it's got to be a little bit of a process. It's a challenge. It's a challenging game that we're playing. And that is, on some level, the whole purpose of the ego is to give us something to transcend, to give us something to rub up against, to uh, challenge ourselves with, something to be able to let go of. Because if we were born and we're just like a rock with no distinct self, sense of identity or self, then it's just not super interesting. You're just like a rock until you get smushed into bits and then you're just back in the earth, but you had no real experience of separateness. We have like very strong, very interesting, and as Alan Watts said, very scary adventures where we go off and do all of these amazing things and all these painful experiences and all these wonderful experiences. And that is like the purpose. So when you're sitting to meditate tonight, if you find yourself fighting against your ego, fighting against the separateness and trying to tell yourself, how come I keep having these thoughts? Why can't I just sit here and be totally present and not have anything that messes up my meditation? It's because that's the purpose. That's why you have the ego. That's why you have the brain. That's why you have a driver to take you around and keep talking to you, is because it really has a very important purpose. It keeps us alive. It keeps things interesting, and it gives us a challenge, something to work through. So you want to embrace and love your ego because it gives us so much. And that's different from being attached to and needing to only be the ego, because then there's so much else that we're missing. So in my experience, just like in meditation, if you start to fight against the thought and you start to resist, that which we resist persists. It's just going to keep coming back stronger and stronger. But if we embrace it, we invite it in, we realize that there's a real usefulness to this thing, the ego, then we can decide to be with it or set it aside, put it in the back seat, let it just get driven around for a little while. Sit comfortably. So tonight, if you have this experience of fighting against the thoughts and fighting against the ego, I'm going to invite you to embrace that thought by just labeling it as thought. There's no judgment. You're not beating yourself up for it. You're just like, oh, that's an interesting thought. And then you just let it go. Close eyes, spine straight, eyes upturned, relax, watch the breath. Let go of all thoughts, worries, and cares. Be here now.